Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future of MedTech series. I am joined by Julie Cole, the Senior Director of Market Development and Strategy for ASCs at Medtronic. Julie, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we are so excited to talk about ASCs because I think that there is no question ASCs are definitely playing a role in the future of the MedTech industry. But before we dive into that, I want to hear a little bit more about you. How did you find your way into MedTech? And then maybe how did you find your way from MedTech to the ASC side?
Sure. Well, I started my career in hospital administration. I was in a hospital in Houston, Texas, and worked my way up through service line directors. And as part of that role, I got to know medical device industry a little bit more, and specifically Medtronic. I worked with them a lot in our cardiac cath lab and in our neuroscience operating rooms, and they recruited me from Houston to Minnesota. I've now been in the MedTech space for 18 years, carried a lot of that knowledge from the hospitals over to MedTech, which has been really instrumental and helpful in my career. And a few years ago, watching all the changes inside of service, I was asked to come join the ASC team, newly formed team about 5 years ago at Medtronic, really focused on how we approach the ambulatory surgery center market and how we look at them not as just small price-sensitive hospitals, but as distinct sites of service with really individualized needs.
Yeah, I can imagine that your background in hospital administration probably really led naturally to this fit. But it is interesting that you say that these are not just mini hospitals. I love that. That's a great way to phrase that, because I think sometimes that is what we think about them. And to that end, what are some of those challenges, perhaps maybe some of the misconception and the challenges that you're seeing as we try to adopt more ASC usage in the MedTech industry?
Well, there's some really specific challenges to MedTech and why some of us fear in MedTech the shift of side of service. And when I think about those challenges, I really think of twofold. One is our service support and coverage model. In MedTech, a lot of the procedures that our devices are used in also require clinical support. So we have representatives in most of the operating rooms when our devices are being used. Now, when we think about coverage, we have 6,000 Medicare certified hospitals in the US, but now layer on top of that 6,000 plus Medicare certified ambulatory surgery centers. So the number of locations that we now have to cover and provide clinical support doubled. The challenge being is that the procedure volume didn't double. In fact, it was really just a redistribution of cases. Some stay at the hospital, some transition over to the ambulatory surgery centers, and we have to find a way to keep our support consistent, regardless of that side of service. And the answer is never just doubling the number of people, given that our revenue and cases haven't doubled. So that's one big challenge MedTech faces. Another is as you shift to the ambulatory surgery center, often reimbursement lowers. Now, that can be good if you're looking at broader healthcare goals of cost constraints, but it can be a challenge on device margin. So we now have to come up with ways to make sure we're maintaining the value we have in our products, but we're also trying to figure out how to economically support the viability of ASCs, but also our businesses. So those two challenges really come into play. And so we have to kind of think a little bit differently as we approach the ASC market.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are two such different challenges.
Yes.
So I'm going to throw in an additional question because I find it very interesting the way that you've described this. How has the separation between the ASCs and the hospital surgeries, has that just naturally evolved so that there was just these are more elective surgeries, or these are just less sick patients? Like how did that transition occur?
It's evolved over time, and it's typically led with technology innovation.
Okay.
So as our technology becomes more minimally invasive, safer, more effective, more predictable and consistent, that allows procedures to shift out of the hospital into a lower cost setting. So ASCs years ago started with very, very simple procedures. But now, in the last few years, we're seeing a lot of increasing complexity in the cases, higher acuity patients are moving over, but that's because the technology is allowing those procedures to be performed very safely and effectively with very consistent outcomes. So as that occurs, as technology advances, more procedures are able to shift.
Okay, I see. That makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that makes sense. And so that leads me to immediate future. What is the immediate future of the ASC market look like? What is going to happen with the medtech industry as right now? Like in the next year, what are we looking at when it comes to ASCs and medtech?
So the immediate future is one, we have to answer that coverage question that we have. There's a couple of different ways that I know MedTech is looking at that. One popular choice is to create dedicated ASC teams. So these are teams that are very nimble, sometimes regionally based, can cover a large footprint. Often this clinical support team can cover more types of cases than what we would traditionally see in the hospital. So that's one way. The second way is we're adopting remote technologies. So how can we create our expertise and instead of having always a one-to-one model, have a one-to-many model? So really tackling the coverage aspect is important. The second piece is how do we wrap our arms around the economics so that we all remain viable? Part of that is we look at very specific needs of the ASC in terms of cases. So ASCs, even though they're growing in complexity, typically have a finite number of procedures they're going to do in a given ASC. So can we do kitting? Can we really look at the products and how we package them and just provide exactly what they need for those cases? Nothing more, nothing less, because they don't have the variability that the hospital typically does. So can we reduce costs by ASC-specific products? We also look at opportunities for flexible business models with ASCs. We've learned that on average, ASCs have 30 days cash on hand. That's a challenge. So can we look at different pricing models or flexible payment terms that allow us to get what we need for devices, but allow them some flexibility in how they spend their money?
Yes, those are all very that makes a lot of sense. It really does, and I can see all of those things being adopted. I particularly am interested in how maybe ASCs are going to help solve some of our healthcare desert situations.
Yes.
We are such a massive country. My husband is active duty military, and so we don't live in urban centers very often. And so one of the things that's so exciting about ASC is perhaps like this expanded coverage that may be allowed. So when you said, this care, one-to-one care versus one-to-many, it's a really exciting area, I think.
It's extremely exciting. When you think of an ASC, they are less expensive to build than hospitals. So you can expand capacity in a much less expensive way, which allows you to reach some of these rural settings that we weren't able to go to before. ASCs allow a lot of flexibility for our providers. So we're seeing specialists go out a little bit further to participate in an ASC because they have the opportunity to have some of that operational control or that financial investment. So I think ASCs are ultimately a really good thing. They are driving down the cost of care. For MedTech, that makes us become creative and innovative. Are we producing the right technology for the right patient in the right site of service?
Which we love in MedTech. That's what we want to do. We want to be innovative, and it gives us that additional opportunity. And so I think we're already kind of touching on this. I'm going to go into my last question, which is, okay, so let's zoom out even further. A decade from now, what does this look like?
Well, the future's bright, I think, in MedTech. I really do. I think you'll continue to see a push towards minimally invasive technologies. So you'll see a lot of technology innovation with smaller, more intelligent devices. That minimally invasive allows for safety and efficacy. I think you're going to see data-enabled care more. So how are we using the data we get from our devices? How are we wrapping AI around that to help make procedures more consistent, to help with remote patient management for those patients that are far off and they need management after a procedure? How can we use AI to help enable that better? The third thing I think you'll see in MedTech is going to be a focus on earlier intervention. Are we able to engage patients earlier in the disease process and maybe slow or prevent the progression of disease? And I think you'll see all of that wrapped in a different service model where we're able to reach more locations and more providers more efficiently.
Well, I agree, Julie. It's been a pleasure having you here. The future is absolutely bright. Thank you so much for joining us for the future of MedTech.